Cindy and I look forward to spending the next hour with you for our annual Yom HaShoah program. We extend a sincere thank you to this year's underwriters, Julia and John Taylor, for making this series possible. In light of world events, I would like to address you from my heart. This year, our program takes place in a time in our world where the threat of annihilation of the Jewish people, not only in Israel, but here and across the globe, is real. Cindy and I have been involved in Holocaust Remembrance for at least the past 3 decades, if not longer. Never have we seen such steroidal hate and a hijacking of the language as it is happening today and at such a high velocity. However, never have we also witnessed the support, devotion, and defending truth and education and preserving history as we witness today. And we can see that by everyone in this room for attending, and thank you. You can go ahead and clap. Our present tenuous times does not deter searching for identity from its work. On the other hand, it magnifies its importance. Next fall, Cindy and I will host a cocktail party at Cindy's home to discuss various options of supporting the work of searching for identity, because history still needs to be told. Students and the public need to be educated. For me to continue to screen traces around the world, provide curriculum and speak on panels, and offer writing workshops to empower the children and grandchildren of Holocaust stories to share their stories, I need support. And you can help ensure that forums like LiterARTure, our Traces screenings, my writing workshops, and book clubs, etc., can continue with your help. Please use the sheets on your table to indicate whether or not you'd like to be included in our fall gathering. We value your friendship and input as we grow searching for identity. Thank you. Cindy.
Okay. By the spring of 1944, hope for the Second World War's end was finally on the horizon. Despite a Nazi edict issued 10 months prior that all Dutch citizens relinquish their radios to the German occupiers, on the evening of March 28, 1944, the Dutch tuned in on their contraband devices and listened to Radio Orange. I love that, Radio Orange. The voice they heard was that of their country's exiled Minister of Education, Arts and Sciences, Gerrit Bolkestein, broadcasting live from the BBC in London. Heard through the crackle of radio waves, his message was as clear then as it is this very afternoon, 80 years later.
History cannot be written, he said, on the basis of official decisions and documents alone. To fully understand what we need as a nation, what we've had to endure and overcome during these war years, then what we need are ordinary documents, diaries, and letters.
Exiled Queen Wilhelmina of the Netherlands, who spoke from the same BBC studios in London 4 years earlier, had encouraged her compatriots to keep diaries as a form of resistance against the Nazi occupying forces. On June 7, 1940, she said, quote, "I beg every Dutchman and every Dutch woman to pluck up courage and write. A young Jewish girl hiding in Amsterdam, inspired by the royal pleas, did just that." 4 years later, in 1944, she took stock of her diary's significance.
Dear Kitty, Mr. Bolkestein, the cabinet minister, speaking on the Dutch broadcast from London, said a collection will be made of diaries and letters dealing with the war. Of course, everyone pounced on my diary. 10 years from now, people would find it very amusing how we lived, what we ate, and what we talked about as Jews in hiding. Anne was inspired, and she began a new writing project that she entitled The Secret Annex. And she wrote about it, quote, "The title alone will make people think it was a detective story," unquote. Her diary is a seminal voice, lodged in our collective awareness, a cautionary tale, testimony of resilient hope and of hatred's constant threat. There's no denying the important lesson learned in her writings, yet, as a teaching tool, the voice of a young girl in hiding does pose educational challenges, a topic we'll explore at another time. So from that broadcast in 1940, we fast forward to today. Due to the creative genius of filmmakers Bianca Stitta and Steve McQueen and author Nina Siegal, we have the opportunity to broaden our understanding of the day-to-day Dutch Holocaust experience. Cindy?
Let's see here. Am I on the right slide? Yes. Stacey and I share many things in common. Love of our families, our faith, art, literature, of course, obviously, travel, museums, Trader Joe's, and of course our dogs, Coco and Gracie. One of the little-known facts about us includes that we both love all things Dutch. If we could return to 17th century Amsterdam or Delft or Haarlem, the golden age of Rembrandt and Vermeer and Hals, Leicester, Ruysch, well, we would be urging Bruce to fly us there in a Mississippi Minute. When Stacey heard about a newly published book, The Diary Keepers by Nina Siegal, written about diaries kept in Holland during the German occupation during World War II, she was hooked and felt as though we were on a path that would be faithful to our annual Holocaust subject while relevant to our times. Determining the art path, though, was a bit trickier. We racked our brains out trying to find a work of art that might mesh. Of course, there was the obvious heroine, one of the most admired people in all of history, Anne Frank, the young Jewish girl we all feel as if we know well. There have been many artistic expressions based on her diary and her prominence as a young Jewish victim of the Holocaust. I gave a talk several years ago on Precious Anne Frank, and this time I wanted to find something a little bit different. In addition, of course, there are many stories about families whose art has been stolen, even a connection locally to the comer. And some of those families' stories could make plot lines for good thrillers. But instead, let's see if I can do this right. Instead, today's art form is an unusual choice, as it is a movie, a long movie, a monumental film and heroic film, a documentary that tackles history and shows it from a completely new and different perspective, which is why it's so captivating. It was inspired by a 560-page text entitled Atlas of an Occupied City that you see on the screen. And the film is entitled Occupied City, and of course the occupied city is Amsterdam, and it dates 1940 to 1945. And the movie is based on the Atlas, and the Atlas was published in 2019, written by a Dutch journalist and historian named Bianca Stitta. And she's a native of Amsterdam. And the atlas really is a map. Her atlas is a map of the German occupation during the Holocaust. And according to the same Nina Siegal that wrote the book about the diaries, she's also a cultural writer for the New York Times. Does she live in Amsterdam full time?
No, she does. Yvonne Stodd-Cohen would be an expert on this. She's Dutch, so if Yvonne says yes, the answer is yes.
Okay. Well, Siegal wrote about Sticta's investigations, describing them as regimented, because she studied over 2,000 streets, and she went street by street in alphabetical order, recording the enormous geographical dimensions of the Nazi occupation. And her meticulous research located where bombs were dropped, where rallies were held, where people suffered and died, and where the soup kitchens of the hunger winter famine took place, apartments where Jewish families, where they lived, where they hid, where they committed suicide, canals where people skated in the winter and where bodies were thrown after murders or suicides, public squares where they were rounded up, trains where they were transported to transit camps, the stop before being sent to Auschwitz or Sobibor, theaters and concert halls where Jews were prevented from attending, and daycare centers where they were held before deportations. Working carefully and unemotionally, Sticta recorded the 5 years of occupation really like an archaeologist. It's really unbelievable, and you might wonder, how was she able to do this? How could she trace history so carefully? And really, the main answer to that is that, unbelievably, the Nazis didn't bomb Amsterdam. They bombed Rotterdam to smithereens. They bombed London, but they didn't bomb Paris. So, do you have any other input on that?
Well, we're thinking that the Nazis occupied the Netherlands in 1 week. So, one and done. And it could also be the value of the port that we are, those are our conclusions.
Describing the atlas as part map, part time machine, the 60-year-old Sticta went on to say in an interview with an online magazine called Culture, quote, "The occupation was always in the background when I was growing up in Amsterdam." She said that she felt like everyone knew. Oh, don't buy at that shop because they were collaborators. The strange thing is that Amsterdam is very much a 17th century city. She said, this is in her words, "You cannot see the war there, but when you know what happened in all those houses, it changes your perception of them." Anne Frank was hiding in a beautiful canal house, end quote. Well, 28 years ago, Sticta met British artist and filmmaker Steve McQueen. Yes, it's like Van Gogh's ear. Let's get this out of the way. There's two different Steve McQueens. There's the hunka burning love Steve McQueen, the actor who I have a photo of him.
It's a very pleasing photo.
It's a very pleasing photo to kind of give us a little levity here on this talk. But anyway, this gentleman on the right in the photo is Steve McQueen, a British artist and filmmaker. And the couple never discuss how they met. They are a couple, they are married, they have 2 children. But it's common knowledge that fairly soon after they met, they went on a long walk all over Amsterdam. And passing a World War II monument, London-born McQueen had an epiphany because he recognized he grew up in a city that had been unoccupied during the war. And it struck him how much history had left its mark on Amsterdam and how much had been lost because the city had become the city of Anne Frank, whose legacy and home were major tourist destinations. And according to the filmmaker, quote, "Some stories had been pushed to the foreground and others to the background," end of quote. And in a video interview, he went on to reveal, quote, "Coming from London, not having grown up in an occupied city, but being here now, it felt like I was living with ghosts. It's almost like an archaeological dig. This is recent history within the last 85 to 90 years, and I thought that this could be fascinating. It is 2 existences. My presence, his presence, he's talking about himself, and another presence. Initially, I thought I could find some footage from 1940 to project on top of present day. But next door, this typing was going on, and it was during the time that Bianca Stictor was writing her atlas. And so he says, it was Bianca tapping the keys of her books, and I thought, quote, well, maybe the past is the text, and the present is obviously the present, and merging the two things together will be it, end of quote. And that's exactly what happened. There's one more layer to ponder, which is he was set to film in 2020. We all remember 2020, right? We hadn't forgotten that quickly. I doubt anybody in the audience will ever forget what happened in that topsy-turvy year. McQueen ended up filming approximately 2020 to 2022, which added another set of challenges. McQueen also asked himself the following questions, and follow me carefully because this is important. One, how do you illuminate the past in the present? How do you illuminate the past in the present, or at least look at the present again? And two, how do you retrieve the past in the present, or at least look at the present again? And Stacey, I love Stacey so much. She's really clever.
Well, thank you so much. When Cindy was telling me this, I thought, oh my gosh, it reminds me of what's going on here in Jacksonville with the Civil War monuments. And not only here, but all over the country, right? How do we deal with the past, reconcile the past with the present? So, of course, I have a brilliant idea because I'm not the one, in charge, so I can fix everything. And I told Cindy what we need to do is hire artists to speak to those monuments, and then they create their own monuments, and then we have a bunch of art, and then that's how we learn from everyone, and then artists can find work, which is so important. And then it's a win-win because we keep the art with the past speaking to the art of the present, and we start an artistic dialogue. I'm very excited about this, and I can even see curriculum. But
okay. One thing at a time.
Well, yeah, exactly. So I just, that was just one of those things.
Thank you.
Sorry. Okay, go ahead.
So you begin to understand that the tension is really between the past and the present was really deliberate here. And eventually he determined that the work was about meditation. We all like meditation, don't we? When we think about meditation, we think of resetting, we think of reflection, we think of being fully present, and also a time to pause from the forces of the outside world. So this helps explain there's no archival footage in this documentary, there are no subplots, there's no narrative, there are no interviews, and furthermore, there is no chronological order. Only Amsterdam and 131 locations out of the 2,000, can you imagine? But he actually filmed all the locations, and it's a 36-hour film as opposed to being a 4.5-hour film. Back to you, Stacey.
So we move from film images, and now we are going to go to diary curation. So the Diary Keeper's origins date back to 2019, and it is an inspiring story, especially if you like a behind-the-scenes look at the creative process. However, its curated collection of diary excerpts and historical information is interesting how it's wrapped, because it is the author's own search for her identity that really dictates the story's direction, and more of that to come. So preparing for this portion of our program has revealed to me yet another reason why people feel compelled to figure out who they are. Learning about Nina Siegal's creative journey and the Dutch diarists in the book Diary Keepers reveals that answer, and it speaks directly to us today. So a bit about her journey. So back in 2006, Siegal traveled to Amsterdam on a Fulbright fellowship, no less, spending a year conducting research for a book about a dead man featured in a 1632 famous Rembrandt painting entitled The Anatomy Lesson of Dr. Nicholas Tulp. So immediately I have to call Cindy and say, oh my gosh, it's Rembrandt. So
Do we have time?
I told her she has exactly 60 seconds.
Okay.
Let's watch her squirm.
Okay. Okay, I'll be
I'm
brief.
kidding.
I'll be brief.
I know
I'll be
you
brief.
are. I trust
It's
you.
really hard to be
I
brief about
understand.
Rembrandt,
I totally
but we were
understand.
looking at a 17th century Dutch painting, an early Rembrandt painted when he was 25 years old, and this painting really put him on the map in Amsterdam, where he had just moved, and it shows the Surgeons Guild. And so you probably already know that this is the time of these great group paintings where citizens who may be in militias or in various guilds commission an artist to paint their members. And in this case, every year, the Surgeons Guild would have a dissection. It's so exciting. And so you can see that the forearm of a hardened criminal, the guy had just been hung that very day, that very morning. The criminal is on the slab, and his dissection is being performed by the chief surgeon, Dr. Nicholas Tulp. Tulp in Dutch is tulip. It's just so great. It's really so great. So, but just a few more words. Notice that it is Baroque because there's a strong contrast of light and dark. There's diagonals going on. This isn't necessarily Baroque, but all the figures are placed within a pyramidal composition, guaranteeing that all their faces are available. It's not like, say, the Night Watch, where some of the people got a little annoyed because Rembrandt put them in the shadows. So all these faces are there for us for our viewing pleasure. Okay, that was 60 seconds.
I so love your passion. I mean, can you imagine being an art student in Miss Edelman's class?
No,
I mean,
no.
how lucky would
Oh,
that?
please stop.
Go back, but not. I don't want to take any more tests. But you see, okay. Now, equally as effusive and excited about the painting was our author. How's that for a transition?
That's good.
Okay, very good. Okay, so. She was actually researching the deceased dissectee in the painting. So while in Amsterdam and doing this, our author comes face to face with questions about her own past, and this odyssey becomes the premise for our book. So picture this. She, in her daily walks from her apartment to the Rembrandt House Museum, she'd pass by buildings, landmarks, street names, just as Steve McQueen was documenting, and it was all reminiscent of a vibrant Jewish history that was gone, vanished like morning fog. And she describes even looking around her apartment and realizing, oh my gosh, I am in a converted storage attic similar to Anne Frank's secret annex. So if you can change the slide. So just down from the Rembrandt House Museum, where she'd go every day, she would pass the Jewish Historical Museum, which was built around what used to be a cluster of former synagogues. And then she would walk by the beautiful Portuguese synagogue, which if you've been to Amsterdam, I'm sure you've seen, because now it's basically a tourist attraction. And there's an image here that I took several years ago, and you can see the benches in the synagogue, and there are prayer shawls and prayer books that are tucked underneath the seats that open on a hinge, and they're waiting for their owners who will never return. So this was happening to her. These ghosts are haunting her. And then she would go to the Waterloo Plain Market near the Amstel River, and she realized this was a place where Jews would come for their foods and objects necessary for their culture and their religious beliefs. And the last time I was there, it was a flea market, and I bought some fun scarves for €1 a piece, whatever. So what was there is it's vanished. It's gone. More buried was this revelation. Now, Siegal is a non-religious Jewish woman who's, living the life from New York City, and she notices that the Dutch Jews are still in hiding. And here's an example. Quote, I found that Dutch Jews rarely identified themselves as Jewish. I was interviewing a couple who organized an exhibition about Nazi looted art, like you do. And I tentatively inquired whether they had a personal connection to the subject matter, because by then I knew not to ask directly. So they waved her into a corner. And they whispered that they both have Jewish parents, but please do not print that in the article because they didn't want their neighbors and friends to know. So her observations about Dutch Jews hiding their identity were astute and really resonated with me. So while in Amsterdam, while she's researching the Rembrandt and having these revelations, she comes upon this archive where there are over, again, 2,100 diaries that are held at the Institute for War and Holocaust Studies. Can you imagine? And here she is going into the vault with the diaries with her daughter and finding these incredible documents. I mean, it's like going into Gringotts and just seeing the gold everywhere. I mean, I've got to bring levity, so we have to do that, right? Yes, of course. So Cindy told us in our introduction that before the war ended, the Dutch government was already asking its citizens to please donate all your diaries and letters and documents because they wanted to complete a comprehensive collection of the war from all points of view, which I think is absolutely brilliant. So upon seeing this collection, she goes, aha, I have an idea for a great story. And she pitches it to the New York Times. So a year later, in April of 2020, voila, and you can go online and find this amazing interactive story. Here is her piece, The Lost Diaries of the War. And it's really cool. You can click and the pages open, etc. And from that article, the book takes root. So I could just stop right there, and if you really want, I could.
No, please.
Because that's so amazing. All right, so she takes a deep dive into all of these materials, and now she has to edit. And this is a difficult task for anyone trying to tell a story, right? What to keep, what ends up on the editing floor. It's so painful.
If you only knew.
Oh, yeah, I can be ruthless. But you have to be, right? You know, big biceps with the eraser. So she says all the diarists deserve attention, but her goal was to add new and different voices. So that's the plan. New and different voices, a range of perspectives. My primary selection criteria was the ability of the writer to draw us, the reader, into the story. And boy, she accomplishes that goal, and so much more. Now, I'm fortunate because Nina we're on first name basis, because I've been researching her a very long time. She presents everything chronologically. I'm so sorry.
I know, really.
Thank God. So everything is in chronological order, and we see diverse diary entries, way diverse. And it's all being documented by entries. It's just right there. So what I'm going to do is I'll present a sampling of these entries today. And I hope you will read the book, get to know the diarist and the story. So on this next slide is a photo in the prologue about her grandfather. And it's a picture of her grandfather and her mother. So she's also, like I said, a single mother. So she's balancing this research and writing, etc., with being a single mom. So we get to see that side of her too. So we end up with multifaceted stories that are personal and historical. Rarely will I recommend a book that is recent, written by an author who is actually aerobic. However, I firmly recommend this book. That is a very big endorsement. Just trust me on that. So here is my last comment about the story structure, and then back to you, Cindy. So what we're presented with is almost this responsa or debate type presentation of history. So it's incredibly interesting. And what you walk away with is this. It is shocking, startling, and so incredibly real. And then weaving it all together is the present. We hear from the author as she provides the super duper important historical context that holds it all together. Okay, Cindy.
Thank you, Stacey. Let's see if I
welcome.
can't. McQueen also uses a reliable narrator in Occupied City, a young British Jewish voice actor, Melanie Hyams, whose hypnotic, dispassionate voice gives us the basics, kind of like Jack Webb and Dragnet, remember, just the facts, just the basics. When she finishes describing, say, if a building had been rebuilt, in her inimitable way, she would say simply, demolished. That's it, flat. And this has driven some critics crazy as they think her presentation is boring. But once you absorb the entirety of this film, it hits you that you, the viewer, have been completely absorbed in this world where people have done so many horrible things to one another that we are forced to look at the past in a new and a different way. And McQueen shot Occupied City using 35 millimeter film over 2 years of filming the entire atlas. And I did tell you that it resulted in a 36-hour film. And he plans on making a work of art that incorporates all 36 hours. That'll be really fascinating to see. By the way, just as an aside, something that got edited out of the presentation was the fact that McQueen won the Turner Prize the year of Stacey Emmons' bed. She got all the publicity because remember we talked about Stacey Emmons last LiterARTure. Anyway, let's see what we got here. At 54, McQueen is a super talented video artist, a film director and producer. He is shown next to the other Steve McQueen. You see the Steve McQueen on the left without a shirt on. And Steve McQueen was nominated but never won an Oscar. Sir Steve McQueen won 3 Oscars for 12 Years a Slave, which won for Best Picture in 2013. McQueen was influenced by a real eclectic group, and you're going to laugh when I tell you some of these names, filmmakers who influenced him, including Andy Warhol. I keep scratching my head, how did Andy Warhol influence Steve McQueen? But anyway, Billy Wilder, Jean-Luc Godard, Ingmar Bergman, and Claude Lanzmann. Claude Lanzmann, you may recall, is the director of the 9.5-hour movie Shoah, this seminal Holocaust film that interviewed survivors, perpetrators, and bystanders. And McQueen's status as a filmmaker is equally as elevated in terms of his contributions. And then one more quick personal note about him. In 2020, he was knighted by Princess Anne and became a commander of the Order of the British Empire. So it just shows you, I mean, we're just looking at a little snapshot of his contributions to British art and culture and, you know, the rest of the world as well. And so he was honored for everything he's done. Back to you, Stacey.
Thank you, Cindy. It is now my honor to introduce you to Elizabeth. In the small town of Epp, about 75 miles east of Amsterdam, we meet Elizabeth van Lausen. It is Elizabeth's diary entries that I find most riveting. She begins her entries on day 1 of the German invasion and writes every day throughout the war. Elizabeth and her family were devout Christians and members of the literal Dutch Reformed Church. She and her husband and her 2 children, her son Gerrit, married to Cindy, who were expecting their first child, and their daughter Maria, who was an aspiring pastor, they all ran a general store in the Velusois Bos Forest, and they were all members of the underground resistance movement. Her entries, along with another diarist, a Dutch Nazi, Douwe Bukker, are some of the first we are introduced to in the Diary Keepers, and those are the two I will introduce you to today. And from that first entry, we are transported. Friday, May 10th. War. I couldn't believe it. The weather was particularly radiant. Paratroopers are dropping everywhere. Sometimes they're wearing Dutch uniforms, clerical clothing, farmers' clothes, and even women's dresses. All day people are gathering and saying things like, "They'll never take our country." Well, they knew it was a possibility, but who would actually really believe this could happen? So from Elizabeth, we now meet Bukker. And this is a stack of his diaries. He also wrote practically every day. So when the Germans invaded, all the Dutch Nazi Party members were taken to jail. So he is arrested, and his diary entries could not be more different than Elizabeth's. So I'm going to go back and forth through that 1 week, okay? Sunday, May 12th. This is from Douwe Bukker. I am interred. I had to answer all kinds of questions that were thrown at me, put into a prison car under strict surveillance, and taken to the main Royal Police Station. Outrageously proper. His bloviating is so disgusting, and it is throughout the book. So now Elizabeth comes in the next day. So now we're Monday, May 13th. I found out that the Queen and the government had gone elsewhere. Where is elsewhere? And why didn't they stay? Elizabeth is referring to the royal family and select Dutch officials who fled London after the Germans invaded and were a government in exile. Can you imagine if our U.S. government left as we were invaded, and next thing you know, you see him on Twitter, tweeting from, Iceland? I mean, can you imagine feeling so, neglected? Okay, now we're going to go back to Amsterdam and to the jail cell, and it is Tuesday, May 14th. So Bukker tries to piece together why he's sitting there in jail, okay? It seems we were all betrayed by Jews. Someone apparently sent an anonymous letter saying I was a member of the NSB, that is the Dutch Nazi Party. Sometimes I worry that the Jews will take excessive revenge if they're to find us before the Germans get here, but our day is coming. So Elizabeth writes that evening. Then suddenly, at 7 o'clock, there was a special announcement, a moment we will never forget. We're not free anymore. Being a part of Germany is terrible. What will the future bring? So the following day, on May 15th, the Nazis now officially are occupying the Netherlands. So again from Epp, Elizabeth writes, the clocks will be on German time from now on. Someone called it a black page in our history. But our day will come someday. I trust in that. So now that the Germans are in charge, the Dutch police are forced to release all the Nazis who are in jail. So now it is Bukker who is now not only freed but put in charge. Okay, and you can see him in this picture. He is wearing the light-colored coat. He's got a cigarette hanging out of his mouth. They're doing a roundup of Jewish men who will be transported to Westerbork and then either Sobibor or Auschwitz. So he says, I'm back on duty again. German soldiers pour across the continent like a giant avalanche. And then a week later, his zealousness is unleashed. The Gestapo have arrived. Justice will be done. There have been a great number of suicides among the guilty Jews. Lie and deceit, Judaism and capitalism are going to get their comeuppance. The genius of Adolf Hitler will crush them. And he is correct about the suicides. The author notes that in the early days of the German invasion, many people unable to get out of the country took their lives, including entire families. I share these condensed entries with you to give you a feel for the book's structure and the tension presented by the opposite voices. And throughout the book, his actions in interrogation are so awful, so vile. His unit is shut down by his own boss. It's so bad. So you can't even imagine. So before we leave, I'd like you to see these images of Elizabeth and her family. And I will share with you the last a compilation of entry of excerpts. They are so brave. They are so human. Elizabeth's family, they risked their lives. They were all interrogated. They were all imprisoned, not knowing their future. And it is because they chose to be human. They chose to be their brother's keeper. This illuminates why, in 1982, Yad Vashem's Holocaust Memorial in Israel honored them. So we're going to go now to 2 years later. It is now September 1942, and this is Elizabeth. Life is now a nightmare. We knew they would treat the Jews horribly, but we had no inkling it would be like this. The Nazi motto is, "No more Jews." The following month, Elizabeth enters the number of Jewish lives that she is hiding in homes surrounding her own home in the forest. House number 1, there are 7. House number 2, there are 6. House number 3, there are 6. House number 4, there are 2 with us here. They all have to be saved. Tomorrow is my birthday. There's no time to celebrate, but it shouldn't go unnoticed. My daughter has been asked to preach the youth sermon. Now I'm going to jump ahead 1 year. Now it's 1943. I wish we were just free already, so that the Jews would not feel like hunted animals. Last night, another couple came, so now we can only accommodate a few more. At house 1, we are 7. At house 2, we are 8. At house 3, we are 5. At house 4, we are 6 and a child. At house 5, we are 9. That is 35 and a great responsibility. And she closes with this. A friend tried to warn me. He said, "Stop." I don't agree with him. You have to do something. If you really want to be some help, we will be careful, but we will continue. Cindy.
Now that is a profile in courage. Thank you, Stacey. In the occupied city, we are drawn in so skillfully without much flourish, with limited text, as I've mentioned, and an unemotional narrator. McQueen envelops us into all kinds of everyday activities. Remember, he's filming during COVID. street scenes, buildings, people out dancing and having fun, frolicking in the park in springtime, ice skating and sledding and swimming in pools and in the canals, riding buses, trains, bicycles, lots of bicycles. According to this e-publication Screen Slate, which is a guide to image culture, McQueen started the documentary with the lowest, darkest, deepest point, okay? And that's what you're looking at here. I tried to get a decent image of it. Most of the images came from the film stills, but this came right from 505 Lancaster Mac computer, and so I did my best. I couldn't even get a screenshot of it, but this is what we're looking at here. This is the very first scene in the film. And you see we're invited into this rather narrow hallway interior of a home, and you hear glasses clinking and silverware, the noise of silverware, so you assume that people are eating, but you never see any. You don't see any people except for the woman who's helping clean up. And in her matter-of-fact way, Miss Hyams, the narrator, tells us that 4 Jewish adults, 1 man who was a printer and publisher of magazines, and 3 women lived in this space. And when the day that the Nazis, the day that the Dutch army capitulated to the Nazis, which was May 15th, 1940, all 4 people took their lives in this space. And so McQueen determined to work from this dark place, and work his way out with his editing. But there's absolutely no order to the way that the movie unfolds. And he described his working method, quote, "It was like an English garden where you find yourself, or you get lost and find yourself, and then you come back to meander." So that gives you a sense of his guiding philosophy, as best as I can describe it to you. Maybe can you click for me? Okay, thank you. Oh, and this was another scene from that one apartment. And then after that was done, you hear demolished. So this is something that was rebuilt, which most of the things we're going to see are rebuilt. Now, we're looking at a bustling mini flea market here, full of odds and ends with, clothes and china and so forth. And during the occupation, this was the site of one of 14 locations of, are you ready? This is such a long description. The Department of the Jewish Council for Travel and Relocation Permits. Well, that was a big-time charade. Where in the spring of 1942, there were no travel permits except to concentration camps. In the spring of 1942, Jews went here to buy their yellow badges in the shape of a Star of David with the word Jew written on them. And we learn in the film that for non-Jews, it was a punishable offense to wear a Star of David or to be caught wearing one. And that, of course, the building where this spot is located was demolished. Go next.
Elizabeth's son was wearing one, and he got in trouble.
Shooting Amsterdam during COVID was kind of a bold move, if you will. And as you might imagine, there were a lot of empty streets, empty public transports, empty storefronts, and everything else relating to a shutdown. But by the way, their shutdown was so quick compared to ours. They said they were going to shut down for 5 weeks, and only was 4 weeks because the people were so furious about it. So this scene you see from the film was McQueen shooting before a protest began, and you can see there that the police are readying to deal with one of the protests about masks. And thousands of people turn out, and you see them in the film, but this was just the picture, the photo that was available to use. And so that includes water bombs, billy clubs, shields, helicopters, dogs, sirens, police on horseback, and everything that you can imagine that police use to control crowds. And at first glance, it really invites comparisons to the SS during the occupation. And But Stichta has the last word on this. She says, quote, "There is just no comparison between lockdowns and the Nazi occupation and the Holocaust," and we'll leave it at that. Next, please, Stacey. There's one more notable thing that went on while Stichta was writing her atlas. She learned of a Jewish man who was hidden on their actual block, and he earned his keep. I don't know why, this is just so emotional. He earned his keep by teaching a young boy piano lessons by tapping his fingers on a table. Further, the couple learned that their children's schools were the sites of some of the worst atrocities against Jews during the occupation, making the project even more excruciatingly personal. Where we see this is the Gerrit van der Veen College, which was a secondary school, and this is a rebuilding of the original location. But according to writer Karen Wolf, the history of the school buildings where McQueen and Stichta's children walked around every day is where Jewish prisoners were interrogated and tortured by the SS in the basement. And in this particular school, it's a location where their daughter stored her bicycle and her backpack. Their son's school was located on the site where a prison had been located. The buildings were demolished, but the memories remain. And they're part of that contingency of ghosts, if you will, that haunt the city. Okay, next. In one of the most absorbing entries in the film, we learn a great deal more about the cultural center of Amsterdam, where the Rijksmuseum and the Concertgebouw are located. And we're looking at a photo that was 3 months after the occupation started, so it was August of 1940, where this would be the spot where Heinrich Himmler, who was the architect of the Holocaust, and the Reich Minister Dr. Seyss Inquart reviewed their troops. Notice the troops are all holding shovels. It's this very strange picture. This was right in front of the Rijksmuseum. Now, speaking of the Rijksmuseum, which would have been full of art had the Dutch not been prescient about the anticipation of the Germans coming to appropriate their cultural property. And by the way, this wasn't mentioned in the film, but 17th century Dutch art was the favorite of the Nazi hierarchy. Hitler, Goering, they couldn't stand the art that was contemporary at the time. They called it degenerate. I promise not to go too far over. But they loved Dutch art, so we'll get to some of that in a second. But the Dutch, in 1939, decided to have a plan about some 30,000 works of art, approximately 30,000, that were moved to churches and to other buildings in northern Holland. All right, can we go to the next? We don't want to look at these Nazis too long. Okay, you're looking at the most famous and most important painting in the Netherlands, Rembrandt's 1642 work called The Night Watch, cultural patrimony as sacred to the Dutch as the Statue of Liberty is to us. First, it was taken to a castle in northern Holland, while underground vaults were being dug, and then it was transferred to a cave near Maastricht, where it spent the war years. Shortly after the liberation, the Night Watch was returned to the Rijksmuseum by inland barge. And just one word about the Night Watch, because that's all I'm allowed. It wasn't a nighttime painting, okay? But somehow, during the 19th century, people who thought they were cleaning paintings back, as far back as even like the 16th, 17th century, they thought that slapping a coat of varnish would brighten a painting, but it did the exact opposite. It dulled it, turned it yellow and brown. And so that's what happened to the Night Watch. And so the name The Night Watch was given erroneously or mistakenly because everybody thought it was a nighttime painting, but it wasn't. And it actually has a real name other than the Night Watch. I just wanted to tell you. It's the Militia Company of District 2 under the command of Captain Franz Banning Koch. Now, of course, it's so much easier to remember the Night Watch than all of that. Okay, next. I wanted to show you it's like 12 by 14 feet. It's huge. And this is what it was taken off its frame and rolled up for the duration of the war. During the occupation, and this is all in the film, during the occupation, the Nazis tried to turn Rembrandt into, I'm not making this up, into a Germanic hero with a big celebration on his July 15th birthday. And it's still called Rembrandt Day to this day. And here, this is so rich. According to Wall Street Journal writer Jonathan Lopez, quote, they shot a feature film, the Germans shot a feature film called Rembrandt with a script personally approved by propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels. It's just too much. In the propaganda film, the great artist, Baroque artist, falls prey to a conspiracy, of course, right, of Jewish moneylenders who deprive him of his home, his reputation, and his life's work. A scenario with absolutely no basis in fact, although ironically, Rembrandt was not a good business person at all. And so some of those same things actually happened to him, but he did it to himself. The Night Watch plays a role in the Nazi movie where the militiamen in the painting criticize the painting because some of the faces are not visible or only half visible. Whereupon, according to Lopez, Rembrandt, now remember, this is a Nazi movie. Rembrandt adopts an oratorical pose mimicking Hitler, which had been Goebbels' advice as he wished to emphasize the parallels between the artist and the subhuman. I mean, that says it all, right? It's just too much. Now back to the film, and these are stories from the occupied city. This was the home of a mother and 4 children who actually, they hid in their own home, but they were really fortunate because, by the way, it was also a refuge for the Dutch resistance, this home. The family managed to escape their deportation center because there was a crooked SS officer who helped them escape, and they went right back to their home, and they had to live as though there was no one there. But after the war, this family nominated the SS officer for an award by Yad Vashem, which Yad Vashem, for those of you who don't know, is the Israeli Holocaust Museum, and they have honored non-Jews who are known as righteous Gentiles over, right after the war, those people who risked their own lives and their families' lives to save Jews. But apparently, after the word got out about this SS officer, the word got out in the survivor community. Many protested, as he was known for demanding alcohol and sex with Jewish women as his price. One of the objectors to his receiving the award said, quote, yes, he saved people, but he was an SS officer, and he made life and death decisions. Needless to say, he didn't make the list. And again, this information is gleaned from the movie, and then prior to that from the Atlas. The final image of the documentary film is this one, a beautiful Dutch family celebrating their son's bar mitzvah, coming of age, 13. Could there be anything more touching than seeing a father kissing his son's head with the proud mother looking on? And in the film, we see a group of young boys racing out of the synagogue after the service is over, which is pretty par for the course. It happens here too all the time because they just want to get out and, burn off some energy. And it's really very personal, this particular image. So this is the very last one, as this family is good friends with McQueen and Stichta. And in fact, if you look carefully, and believe me, I've watched this film now 1.5 times. I cannot tell a lie. I can't say I watched it twice. That would have been really over the top, but I have watched it 1.5 times. And there's a brief shot of Stichta in the synagogue sitting with her son next to her at the bar mitzvah. It's really, and he's in it too. McQueen's in it smoking. He smokes a lot. All right, the image is especially powerful as it seems as if After 4 hours of watching many seemingly disconnected places, we see a picture of family joy and happiness and, of course, hope, which, of course, we want it to end on. But just to be clear, this was not McQueen's objective. He said this to the Guardian writer Ellen Joyce, quote, "It wasn't a Hollywood movie. It was just basically living with things as they are, as they have to be. Scenes of everyday life in the city also helped. When I was going around filming," McQueen said, "it was heavy to think, oh, this person was shot here, or there are kids playing hopscotch where a person lay dead. It's very sobering. But it also tells me what was fought for to get to this moment." And he makes that point quite a few times. I hope that you'll want to invest in watching this extraordinary film. It rewards you over and over. You have to get over thinking that it's 4 hours. I mean, you just have to, and you just have to let it wash over. You just have to let it sink in, and it rewards you, and it reminds us more than anything what was lost during the Holocaust, all those memories that were lost forever, and why it's essential that we pay homage to those whose memories were wiped out just because they were Jews. And Stacey, I know you want to have the last word, so go right ahead.
Thank you so much, Cindy. In the spirit of the Passover holiday that is upon us, let us recognize through all of this the resilience of the human spirit. No matter the challenges, the human spirit always triumphs. So I want to thank you for coming today. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to thank Yvonne Cohen, who recommended that I read The Diary Keepers. I really appreciate the recommendation. And we hope to see you next month, May 15th, for our final program of the season, which is about vanity. Thank you so much.